Now, in fact, that trend hasn't borne out over time. There's not more and more capital per industrial worker. Many of the innovations are capital saving as well as labor saving. What there usually is more and more energy per worker, but that doesn't entail a larger capital expense. Well, what Marx said was that the earlier economics, from Keynes and the physiocrats down through Adam Smith, that economists had left out an element of value that was very important, and that was the depreciation on the machinery. And Marx said, if a capitalist, an industrialist, invests in machinery and plant and equipment, they have to recover the cost that they've spent on this plant and equipment. Just as a bondholder would not only get interest, they'd get the principal. The capitalist not only makes a profit on his investment, but as the machinery wears out, he gets to recapture the capital that he actually put into the machinery so that he can buy new machinery and upgrade. And Marx added that even if the machinery doesn't wear out, it becomes technologically obsolete as efficiency and productivity of new inventions rise. So Marx said, as there's more and more capital relative to the cash flow that corporations earn, there's going to be less and less profit relative to this cash flow. So all Marx meant when he talked about the falling rate of profit was a rising rate of depreciation. Now, I've heard many Marxists give talks over the last 4 decades, and I've never met one who understood really what depreciation was. And they think that profits fall because wages go up, and very few socialists and Marxists actually read Capital. Some do, but when I grew up, just about everybody I knew was a Marxist because of my family, and not a single socialist leader or labor leader that I knew had ever actually read Capital. But they all knew about the phrase falling rate of profit, so I don't want to use it. Today, profits are falling for quite a different reason that neither Marx nor anybody else in the 19th century could have guessed. And profits are falling because corporate raiders and ambitious conglomerate builders are borrowing the money to buy other firms, and so profits are being used to pay interest to bondholders. So cash flow is being crowded out, not by payment for machinery and depreciating machinery, but by paying more and more debt service to the creditors. And that's something that nobody in the 19th century really believed would happen. They anticipated that finance was going to be a handmaiden for industrial capitalism, that it would finance capital investment, not dismantle it, downsize it, and outsource the labor force. Nobody anticipated that the financial sector would turn as perverse as it's done really in the last 3 decades.
I'm speaking with financial economist and historian Dr. Michael Hudson. Today's show, The Financial Barbarians at the Gate. I'm Bonnie Faulkner. This is Guns and Butter. I'm glad that you've discussed this concept of falling rate of profit, because I always hear this bandied about, and it's never really been clear what exactly the theory is. So thank you for that.
Well, Marx went over this particularly in his theories of surplus value, which originally he'd planned to make the first volume of Capital. And that itself is in 3 books. It's as long as Capital, and in fact, Engels and then Kautsky made much of the second and third volumes of Capital off the manuscript of Marx's theories of surplus value. And the first translation into English was by my own mentor, Terence McCarthy. And in his introduction to that in 1952, which he translated under the title A History of Economic Doctrines, he explains the role of depreciation and called Marx really the first modern cost accountant, because value theory is basically a theory of the necessary costs that go into producing goods and services, and Marx's theory of surplus value was the first history of economic thought that really reviewed in a critical fashion what kind of costs were socially necessary and what kind of costs were not necessary, namely rent and interest, that were the topics of the second and third books of the series of Surplus Value, and also the second and third volumes of Capital, respectively. Very few Marxists really get into the second or the third volume of Capital, but especially the third volume of Capital is where Marx gets into the fact that finance grows not as a reflection of the rate of profit, but purely autonomous mathematical laws independently of the capital process. And the danger, Marx thought, was that finance would break free of industrial capital, and rather than being industrialized, as he hoped to see, would take on a life of its own and end up stifling industrial investment. And in fact, that's exactly what's happened.
Well, that's very interesting. I have here a quote from one of the articles you've written lately. It says, Marx was an optimist when it came to his expectations for how banking would evolve.
He thought that industrial capitalism would be run by the industrialists with a view towards accumulating more and more physical capital to expand markets. And contra Ricardo, Marx said that there could not be a permanent crisis under industrial capitalism because capitalists would continue to make innovations and invest in cost-cutting innovations to undersell their competitors. Well, of course, this is obviously where Schumpeter got much of his ideas about innovation. And Marx believed that with industrialists influencing governments, and with governments believing that their best hope for national advance, including military advance, was going to be by building up industry, that industry and the government together would subordinate finance to serve the needs of industry. And in fact, industry is now being carved up to make short-term gains for the financial sector in a way that nobody really expected. Engels, in a footnote to the third volume of Capital, said Marx was always a follower of the French Saint-Simonian, Saint-Simon, who wanted to shift banking away from the creation of debt and credit into something much more like a mutual fund, like you had with French banking in from the 1860s and 70s, and later German industrial banking and Central Europe banking, where you had banking allied with industry much more. After World War I, and especially after World War II, because England and America basically won the war, they dismantled the German industrial banking system and replaced it with a kind of rip-off banking, especially real estate banking, that you have today with the Anglo-American banking system, not the German and later the Japanese industrial banking system. That's something that nobody in the 19th century could have anticipated, the dominance of finance over industry rather than of industrial capitalism over finance.
Yes, and then you went on to say, with regard to Marx, he expected finance to become part of the industrial economy and thereby rescued from its historically predatory behavior. With regard to Marx's long-term perspective, industrial capitalism is not evolving into socialism, but into a parasitic and extractive finance capitalism. One therefore can say that the greatest tragedy to befall industrial capitalism is its failure to evolve into socialism. Instead, it is retrogressing into the neofeudalism of debt peonage to a financial oligarchy.
Couldn't have said it better myself. At the New School, I used Theories of Surplus Value as my textbook for national income accounting. Heilbronner refused to let me teach the course again and brought in a bunch of Stalinist thugs, who one of whom committed suicide under LSD, and essentially forbid me to teach what Marx wrote in order that he could teach his own Stalinist version of Marxism.
When was this?
From 1969 to 1972. Basically, in 1971 and 2, I was teaching a national income course at the graduate faculty of the New School and using Terence McCarthy's translation of the Theories of Surplus Value as my textbook. This brought huge protests from the Stalinist faculty.